The prairie was pale with frost, and dawn bled slow across the sky like a wound that refused to close. Wind scraped low over the dead grasses, nudging dust toward the bones of a fence that hadn't seen repair in seasons. Along that broken line moved a wagon, tired and creaking, its wooden wheels more moan than motion. No driver called it forward. No horses pulled it. Just a woman with a scarf tied over her head, shoulders hunched like she'd been carrying weight too long for her frame. Sarah Lovell was 25. Her dress, pink once, now dulled by wear and weather, hung off her frame. She had the kind of long brown hair that might have made a man's breath catch once, back when her eyes didn't carry so much tired grace. Her hands were cracked, her cheeks hollow, but her arms held what the world had cast out. 3 newborn girls, bundled in faded blankets, warm only from her own body. She paused where the road dipped and looked out over Jasper Hollow, the town still half asleep under a faint orange light. She didn't expect kindness there. She hadn't met much of it since her husband left her right after the birth, called her cursed for birthing 3 girls and not a boy. Said it was nature's judgment. Said he'd find a real wife. And he did fast. Sarah walked on. A ways off, Herland Brandt guided his stallion toward town with the kind of steadiness men noticed and women whispered about. He was 35, shoulders broad, jaw clean-shaven by a knife he kept sharper than most men's souls. His coat was tailored and dark, hat low over gray eyes that didn't miss much. Herland was rich, not by inheritance but by will. Land, cattle, rail ties and silence had earned him more respect than warmth. Folks said he'd grown cold after his fiancée died in a barn fire 10 years back. He never remarried. Never smiled. Never stayed long enough anywhere for dust to stick to his boots. He slowed when he saw the wagon. At first, he thought it was just another settler's wreck. Maybe someone drunk left it abandoned. But then he caught the curve of a woman's back, the angle of her bent head as she adjusted something inside the swaying box. A cry. Faint. Meant to be muffled. A baby. Then another. Herland tightened the reins. The woman turned slightly, not all the way. Her gaze lifted just enough to catch his, brief, cautious, proud. She wasn't asking for help. That rattled him more than if she had. He nodded once, touched the brim of his hat and rode past. But long after the frost melted from his gloves, the image stayed. A woman walking the edge of the world with 3 infants pressed to her ribs like her heart had broken into thirds and kept beating anyway. At the church barn that evening, Reverend Ashby shuffled straw into corners while Sarah settled in behind a haystack, pressing her daughters to her side like stitched stars. He brought her a cup of warm milk and a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and old sermons. "Only a night," he said, his voice kind but trembling with the weight of townsfolk whispers. "Some say you invited shame upon yourself. You know how folk are." Sarah nodded. "I do. You'd be safer moving along, miss. These people, they don't always know how to be gracious." "Neither does life," she said quietly. The Reverend hesitated. "If you head north, there's ranches. A few good men still left in this world." Sarah looked at her babies. Lily. Rose. Violet. They cooed without knowing they were unwanted. "Good men don't want what I come with," she murmured. "They want clean slates. Not stained pages." Miles away, Herland stood near the hearth at his ranch, swirling whiskey he hadn't touched. Bertie May, his cook and housekeeper, 60 and sharp-eyed, stirred stew over the flame, watching him like she'd raised him herself. "You rode past a woman today," she said without turning. "And now you can't stop looking like someone stole your sleep." "Wasn't my business," Herland muttered. Bertie's ladle hit the pot hard. "Maybe it wasn't. But there's a difference between not your business and not your soul's." "She's got babies," he said, as if that explained the entire ache in his chest. Bertie turned. "Sometimes God sends a woman with more heart than most men can carry. Maybe that's why he gave her 3. That night, the wind howled. Snow tapped like warning fingers on the windows, and Herland, without much thought, saddled his horse again. Said it was to check the south fence. Bertie didn't argue. He found her behind the church, half under the eaves, clutching 2 babies while the third wheezed softly on her shoulder. Sarah didn't stand when he arrived. She looked up slowly, brows drawn. Her fingers were red with cold. He dismounted, tossed his coat over her without a word. "I don't need saving," she said quietly. "Didn't say you did," he replied. "I just needed milk." He nodded. "I have some." She blinked, tired. "Why now?" "Because I saw you and didn't stop. And I keep hearing that baby cough in my sleep." She bit her lip. A tear escaped. Not from weakness, just from being seen. He helped her into the saddle. The horse moved steady under the extra weight. His coat around her, his arm lightly behind her back, the trail seemed less cruel. At the ranch, Bertie met them with warm water and heated stones wrapped in cloth. Sarah stared at the ceiling beam above the guest loft bed, as if unsure it was real. Herlin didn't stay. He walked out without asking her name. The next morning, she was up before the rooster. She'd swept the front porch, boiled water, and stitched a torn edge on the window curtain. Her hands were fast but gentle. Her hair tied in a fresh braid, the babies bundled in a corner of the hearth where the sun hit first. Herlin paused in the hall. Watched her in silence. Then walked on. Day by day, she worked like someone with a debt to repay, though no one had asked her to. She never asked to stay longer. Never leaned too heavy. But she sang to her daughters, soft songs of rivers and blue jays and lilacs blooming in dry places. Herlin found excuses to come back early from cattle check. To eat supper in the kitchen, rather than alone in the den. Once, he brought her a spool of thread from town. Said Bertie needed it. But Bertie raised a brow and smiled slow. Buck, one of Herlin's ranch hands, leaned over during fencing repairs and said, "You're catchin' feelings, boss." Herlin scoffed. "She's just someone I gave shelter to." Buck nodded toward the cabin. "She sweeps like she owns the dust." Herlin went quiet. Sarah, meanwhile, whispered names into the baby's ears. Named them not for men, but for meanings. Lily. Innocence. Rose. Courage. Violet. Faith. One night, she stood outside the barn, watching the clouds roll like bruises across the sky. Herlin found her there, coat over his shoulder, boots quiet on the dirt. She didn't turn when he arrived. Just said softly, "I would have made a good wife, if someone had seen me as more than a womb." He didn't reply right away. He looked at her hands, cracked, but still cradling. Looked at the way she didn't shrink anymore. Then he said, "You still might." And she breathed in, like he'd given her something she didn't know she'd lost. Next day, trouble came. Tulliver, ex-husband, arrived at the gate with 2 men, and a town deputy trailing behind, grinning too wide. "I come for what's mine," Tulliver said. "The children." Herlin didn't flinch. "You signed them off." Tulliver smirked. "No law says I can't change my mind. Might be worth something one day. Girls grow pretty." The breath left Herlin's chest in a cold burst. Sarah stood on the porch, babies inside, her fists clenched at her sides. Herlin stepped forward. "Not fast. Just certain. You so much as think about claiming them again, I'll see you buried in paperwork till you can't breathe." Tulliver barked a laugh. "You think you can play their father now?" Herlin turned slightly. Looked at Sarah. She was crying, but silent. "If she'll have it," he said, "then yes. I do." And then, to everyone's shock, he took off his hat, turned fully to her and knelt. "I ain't good with words," he said low. "But I'd marry you, Sarah Lovell. Not cause of pity. Not cause of them girls. But because I've never seen someone hold pain and beauty in one breath like you do. You made a house out of sorrow. I'd like to build the rest." The wind dropped like it was listening. Sarah stepped forward. Laid one hand on his chest, over a heart she didn't think could beat for her. "Then rise," she whispered. "I'm already yours." They married that evening, under the cottonwood behind the house. Bertie was witness. The babies were swaddled in clean cloths, cheeks pink with health. Herlin took each into his arms, one by one, and whispered their names like a promise. Sarah looked out over the fields. The snow now melted into soft mud, and felt, for the first time in a long time, chosen. She turned to the man beside her, the one who'd once ridden past, and now stayed to name her children his, and smiled through tears. A new wind rose. Warmer this time. And though the road ahead was still long and laced with judgment, she no longer walked it alone. Before you ride off, tell me, where in this wide, weathered world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It warms my heart to know how far these frontier stories travel, like whispers carried on prairie wind. And if this tale of second chances and soul-deep seeing stirred something in you, leave a word for Sarah. Or for the kind of man who doesn't flinch when love asks something deeper of him. If you believe that true warmth isn't found in riches, but in being chosen. If you believe a woman's worth ain't in what she births, but in how bravely she keeps going.